Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we will interview Brenden. Brenden is the founder of Mastertalk, a YouTube channel he started to help the world master the art of public speaking and communication. He helped purpose-driven entrepreneurs achieve their milestones in life and master their message. Today he shares his view on important trends in the post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HTJ Tax. And we're live. Good morning, Brenden. How are you today?
Very good, Derren. How about yourself, man?
I'm pretty good. Thank you very much. It's great to see you. It's great to connect with you. And thanks for sharing your time and your expertise. Now, for those who are watching on YouTube or those who may be listening on various podcast platforms, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Brenden. I'm the founder of Mastertalk, which is the YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of communication and public speaking. And how I got started
Mhm.
was when I was in university, I used to do these things called case competitions. So
Right.
think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age thought, playing football or basketball or soccer was the way to go, which probably was in their case. For me anyways, that really wasn't the way I played. So what I did instead is I did presentations competitively. So for 3 years, competed in over 50 case competitions, and I've presented over 500 times, coached a bunch of people. So I get a corporate job, like I see your tax consultant, and I used to work at Price Waterhouse Coopers, and I thought PwC was a water bottling company. It's how lost I was when I started university, anyways.
Mhm.
So fast forward a couple of years, I'd gotten the success I wanted to. I got the dream corporate job. I used to work at Price, now I work at IBM.
Yeah.
And then I just asked myself, what do I do with my life now? I'm pretty secure financially.
Mhm.
But then what I realized was the bigger meaning to what my life should be. That's when I had the idea for Master Talk, because I realized a lot of the content on communication, public speaking, frankly sucked on the internet. So
Yeah.
I wanted to do something about it. I didn't think much of it. My goal was to be a senior executive at a company. I didn't want to do anything special with my life. But then the YouTube channel started getting a lot of traction. I started getting better on camera and never looked back ever since.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And you're right, especially as we're going through whatever we're going through right now. The online communication is now the default. It's all about Zoom. It's all about Microsoft Team or whatever your platform of choice is. And I guess whereas before when things were in person, we could talk about fixing your tie and this and that. The whole idea of making that great first impression was way different from the way it is right now. Now it requires a different skill set, different range of tools to make that fantastic first impression. And I guess that's where you come in and you coach people where we're all in Canada, US, all over.
Yeah, exactly. I would say most of my clients these days, though the videos are for everybody who's listening. If you
Yeah.
if you have an idea worth sharing, check them out. They're all free. They're awesome.
Yeah.
But for my personal client base, most of these days, I usually coach technology executives
Okay.
on how to move up the C-suite.
Hmm.
So people who are managers or directors that wanna get to the next level in their communication skills.
Hmm. Okay, so that's a great segue because as I was saying earlier, we are in, and I'm sorry to use a cliche, we're in unprecedented times.
Here we go.
And unprecedented hashtag unprecedented. That I mean, that's really overplayed, but it is what it is. We've never been here before, and you bring that fresh perspective. You've been speaking to people, and you've been playing in the technology space for a while now, and you're talking to people who are decision makers in different geographies. What are your thoughts? What trends should we be paying attention to?
Right. So what I think is more important to focus on is the mindset, and then we'll talk trends.
Okay. Okay.
So actually, let's start trends really quickly. So the way of summarizing COVID and what's happening, in my opinion, based on all the people I talk to, it's an accelerant. It's an
Yes.
accelerant of everything.
Yes.
So e-commerce was going to destroy retail stores in 20 years. They're just doing it now, right? Or food delivery was going to be a lot more popular 15 years ago as the economies of scale effect takes of higher importance.
Mhm.
That's happening a lot quicker now,
Mhm.
right? Even
Mhm.
if the business isn't as cost effective
Mhm.
as it is probably in China, like it's a lot more popular than it used to be. So what's happening with COVID is all of these trends are accelerating a lot more quicker than we thought. I mean, another easy example I could give you, people in my company used to take $5,000 flights to sign contracts. Now they're realizing, why am I spending $5,000, but I can't get a $50 meal approved? Like things are, things are, people are starting
Yeah.
to question a lot of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think what's interesting from a life perspective
Mhm.
is COVID is also an accelerant of who we are. Because usually what happens, what I've seen anyways, is you live life, you do this thing because everyone else tells you to do. You wake up at 45 and you kind of just go, what happened to my life?
Yeah.
But now all these people are having this beautiful awakening at
Mhm.
30, right?
Mhm.
So hopefully COVID ends up being a positive rather than a negative for most people, though has been destructive for the most part. But anyways, I think the way that I think about this is it made me realize an important lesson, and that's understanding who the enemy is. So if I
Enemy.
ask anybody, yeah, who the enemy is. So if I ask anyone, Darren, who's the enemy? Who's your enemy? They'll say something like the guy who cut me off in traffic.
Mhm.
My wife isn't doing this. My girlfriend isn't doing this. My boyfriend is. I'm like, whoa, hey, you should be nicer to your. But it is the point that I'm driving is nobody really understands who the common enemy is because we all have the same enemy,
Mhm.
and that enemy
Is
is
ourselves.
time. No, it's time.
Time. Okay.
Well, it's ourselves too. But the reason why I always say it's time
Mhm.
is because we can throw money at time. We
Mhm.
can yell at time. We can scream at time. We can tell time to go this place, go that place. Time will always win in the end,
Mhm.
right? If you're meant to live 60 years, you'll live 60. If you're meant to live 27, you'll live 27.
Mhm.
Once people understand that,
Mhm.
their mindset will change. So let's say, for example,
Mhm.
now a lot of people say 2020 is canceled, as if you could go to a bank and get a loan back for it. Hey, can I get a +1 back to my lifespan? That's
Mhm.
not how life works. Okay,
Mhm.
the year is going to run out. So
Yeah.
yes, was I upset that 70% of my speaking revenue went to zero overnight? Absolutely. Yeah, sure. I cried for a couple of days. But then after I said, okay, how do I reinvent myself?
Mhm.
How do I still add value to people?
Mhm.
And luckily for me, I was already had plans of building a YouTube channel that was already going,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I just doubled down. Now I wrote my content 3 years in advance. I started
Wow.
guesting on hundreds of shows. I started, doing whatever I could to spread this message. And obviously I
Mhm.
was able to recover a lot of that revenue by
Mhm.
by pivoting into a coaching business rather than a speaking business. But I
Mhm.
think the lesson here is you need to understand that you need to reinvest this time because you're not getting it back. And the people who do invest this time when COVID's over are the people who are sprinting for the finish line where
Mhm.
everyone else is just putting their shoes on.
Mhm. That is amazing. So I 100% agree with you that it's this pandemic has been a catalyst. It has accelerated pre-existing trends. I 100% agree with you. And then within my network, I see exactly what you're saying. That there are people that were like, "Oh, poor me. I'm gonna play some video games. I'm gonna Netflix, like 24/7." As opposed to those who say, hold on, I'm going to do a course, I'm going to rethink the strategy for my business, I'm going to invest the time in a sensible way, and they are light years ahead. So I'm with you 100%, with you 100%. But that is more easily said than done. It has been somewhat of a traumatic time. People have lost their homes, they've seen their jobs, they've been in this job for how many decades, the company has gone under. It's really hard to look at what has happened in a positive way. What would you say to people who are struggling with that?
Yeah, and I'm happy to explain my thoughts on why that is.
Hmm.
The reason is because the last 10 years, I know this is weird coming from a 24-year-old. It's just I am always learning from different perspectives and how to grow.
Hmm.
Is the last decade has been the greatest decade of economic prosperity in the history of America. Literally.
Hmm.
This is the greatest bull market. Like the last recession was in 2008. So nobody knew what a recession was,
Yeah.
right? Nobody was ready for that kind of thing.
Hmm.
What I always tell people is that whether you're running a business, whether you're running a family, whether you're running both, or really anything, you always want to prepare for the worst case scenario. Obviously,
Hmm.
nobody really expected COVID, even the smartest people on the planet. But I think the beauty that COVID gives us is
Mhm.
it doesn't get worse than this unless there's a war. Like it is, well, if there's a war, we're just kind of all mess. There's not much needs for tax services anymore, right? But but I think the point is,
Yeah.
minus that worst case, the only way to go up, the only way to go now is up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the key for people is understand. Okay, here let me explain this in a different way.
Mhm.
There's that piece, but there's another piece that always gets me going because there's always bad things happening in my life too, in the same way as yours.
Yeah.
So I have this saying that I live by, and that saying is that perspective frees us from the chains of constant complaining. So the more that you have perspective,
Mhm.
the easier it is for the chains of gossiping, the chains of complaining to fall off the shackles of your hands.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? So for example, if I'm looking at my life and I go, I just lost 70% of my revenue, life sucks. But there's also people in different parts of the world who don't have water to drink this morning. So what do I have to complain about? Right? I
Yeah.
have a Canadian passport. You know how valuable that thing is? Just,
Especially right now.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it's just maybe not right now, but in general, just like
Yeah.
people don't, you can go to most countries around the world, they don't ask you for a visa. Like life is pretty good. So I think the idea is if you live in America
Mhm.
and you're making 30, $40,000 a year,
Mhm.
you're in the 1% of the human race currently at this present moment. Most people don't even have a kitchen in their house, the
Mhm.
level that we do. So
Mhm.
I think it's that perspective that allows us to keep playing the game
Mhm.
from a different point of view. But whereas if we're always comparing ourselves to the friends that we have that didn't lose their jobs, of course we're going to be miserable. But if we're always comparing ourselves to the people who don't even have basic needs,
Mhm.
that's what gives us perspective. That's what gives us life. So for me, like Master Talk is not about the executives that I coach. And I tell them this all the time, right? Master Talk is about the people who can't afford me.
Mhm.
That's why I'm so passionate about this public speaking stuff.
Mhm.
So for you, for what you're doing, for what you're trying to achieve, this is the audience who's listening, right? What is that thing that you're meant to be doing that you would still do whether you were in the worst economic time of our lives, which is likely what we're heading towards. But
Mhm.
if you can find that thing, and especially during these times when the bell curve goes back onto the right side and we're back into a bull market, you'll be able to take advantage of that opportunity.
Hmm. That's a great perspective. It reminds me, I had a friend back in Singapore, and she would always say first world problems. When people complain about like Wi-Fi or my phone doesn't work or whatever, that's a first world problem. Because to your point, it's keeping that perspective that look at the world around you and just gratitude. Just be grateful. Stop complaining. Just be grateful for where we are. So so in terms of coping tools, number one, you're saying that sense of perspective, that sense of gratitude. What else can we do?
Absolutely. So let me give you my secret sauce as to how I became so successful at such a young age, right? So the secret sauce. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm not that successful. I'm just kidding. But the sauce I'm going to give you that nobody talks about on shows that boggles my mind is the most important habit that you should be implementing in your lives. It's
Hmm.
not yoga. It's not meditation. It's not eating the right things. All things are great,
Hmm.
but the one thing you need to do is you need to ask yourself one hard question about life every single day. I guarantee you, if you do this for 30 days, your
Hmm.
life will change. Let me give you some examples of questions.
Hmm.
What are you pretending not to know? If you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? If you died tomorrow, what would your funeral speech say about you and how would you change the script? If you were on your deathbed at 99 years old and you were allowed to go back to today,
Hmm.
what would you do right now?
Hmm.
These are the questions that allow us to find the answers to our own life.
Yeah.
It's just most people are afraid to ask those questions. So the difference between me and everyone else, Darren, I'm not more special or more important or, more savvy. The only difference is that I wrote my funeral speech at the age of 20,
Hmm.
right? So when I did that, I kind of just said, "Whoa, I don't have a lot of time here.
Hmm.
I need to play differently." So I started learning from other people. I started seeing all the mistakes that are making people that are getting divorced, people that had big egos, people who are getting their success to their head. And I looked at all of them and I said, I'm not going to make any of these pitfalls so I
Hmm.
can save that decade. So when I'm in my 30s, I'm going to be ultra successful. So I think the key for people is for you that might mean something different. You
Mm,
might go through the series of questions and realize that, hey, I actually want to spend 3 days a week with my family. But
mm,
then my response to you is, why are you only spending one or two? You're clearly doing something wrong. There's a misalignment here. How do you fix that misalignment? Same thing.
yeah, I see what you mean, and that ties back in a way to your previous point about the value of time, the value of time, and I think that's one thing. At least I've seen that in my echo chamber. People are more sensitive and more aware of how valuable time is and their own mortality. I guess the mainstream media is screaming at you every day how many people died, how many people died, how many people died. So it does mess with your head. And for our practice, we are doing a lot more consultations on estate planning. They're young, guys that are in their 30s and they're thinking, I have kids, I have a wife. Just in case, you know what? Let's have a talk. Let's see what we can do. So yeah, I see exactly what you mean. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Hmm.
Absolutely. And I think that's fascinating what you said there, because there's one other thing we didn't talk about with COVID. Some businesses are actually doing a lot better now because of COVID.
Hmm.
Things like real estate planning businesses,
Hmm.
food delivery businesses. So it's all about understanding where you're at in the spectrum and then figuring out how you can maximize the opportunity.
Yeah, and that ability. When I talk to my staff, sometimes I talk about Madonna because she's an amazing person in the sense that she manages to reinvent herself and somehow stay strangely relevant from the 80s to today. I was at a
Right.
uh, dinner last night and her name came up. you know, who lasts that long in that type of business. And, I was telling one of our marketing team, hey, your job became redundant at the beginning of this year because she would organize like networking events, like physical events. We don't do that anymore. So we've all had to pivot and we've all had to reinvent ourselves. The way we market, the way we provide our service has had to really endure some sort of makeover. So yeah, it is what it is, and it does come with anxiety, but it is an exciting time in the same way because, as you pointed out, there are companies that have just exploded. And you're thinking of your Amazon and at least Uber Eats. I don't know about Uber Ride, but Uber Eats. People in certain spaces they're doing exceptionally well. So I guess for those who are willing to really think things through and be unafraid to ask difficult questions, this can be an opportunity, not just, oh my God, this is a crisis. I want to cancel 2020. I wish 2021 will come quickly. So, okay, I hear what you're saying. But you mentioned your age probably twice. How is it, in at a time when the perception, at least around baby boomers, is that millennials are so entitled, and they just want the world handed on a platter and they don't want to work, and you know how is it that you seem to see things differently and to have positioned yourself in the way in which you have?
Yeah, absolutely. What I find fascinating about these things is everyone's always a critic, Darren. Everyone is always going to say something. Yeah, let me give you the fun example here. If you're in your 20s, you're too young. If you're in your 30s, you should focus on your kids' education, your marriage, and the house you just bought. If
Yeah.
you're in your 40s, you should focus on getting into a senior executive role. If you're in your 50s, you're getting old. If you're in your 60s, you're retiring, so don't bother doing anything special with your life.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter which age range to read. You're always going to get critics. Whether you do something important,
Hmm.
man, how did that person do this? He doesn't deserve that, or she doesn't deserve that. Or if you don't start at all,
Yeah.
this person's so lazy. They're always on the couch, they're always watching Netflix all the time. Doesn't matter. Same thing with the quote that you just gave.
Hmm.
That is a huge generalization, right? Not from you, obviously, but from the people who give it. So my opinion
Hmm.
is that's why the
Hmm.
series of questions is so important, because you'll realize
Hmm.
that everyone is actually wrong about everything. I'll give you the number one example.
Hmm.
Okay, let's use the definition of normal. We're
Yeah.
all trying to be normal, right? We want to be like everyone else, and our brain is wired that way.
Mhm.
I want Derren to accept me for who I am, or else Derren won't like me, and I need him so
Mhm.
that I can build connection and survive, right?
Mhm.
Because humans survive in tribes.
Yeah.
So now with that logic in place,
Mhm.
what does most normal people sound like and do? This is what the definition of normal, just so people are on the same page. You're obese, you're
Mhm.
probably divorced, you
Mhm.
have too many kids,
Mhm.
you don't like your career, you hate your job, you're probably depressed, you're eating McDonald's all day, and
Mhm.
you have no clue why you're alive.
Mhm.
Do you really want to be normal with all of that credit card debt, all of the iPhones you don't need, and a white picket fence that you're not sure why is it white?
Mhm.
Well, who wants to be normal anyways?
Mhm.
That's what happens. When you start to question everything, you start to realize that most people have no clue what they're talking about. And the only person's opinion that matters is your own. So,
Mhm.
for example, the
Mhm.
conversation that we're having together, I
Yeah.
would love people to just look at me and just say, this is what I like, but this is what I don't like. I don't want to work 16 hours a day. This guy's nuts, right?
Mhm.
So instead, what you want to do in every conversation you're listening to is
Mhm.
you want to say, based on my unique goals,
Mhm.
based on my unique beliefs, and more importantly, based on my own unique experiences, I'm Derren,
Mhm.
right? And not, Brenden, is because I might have a family, I might have this. What tips can I take from this guy that apply to my life? Oh, maybe I should write my own funeral speech. But then the other side of this is like, well, I can't work 16 hours a day. I have kids. That won't work. Right. So it's always about thinking about what can you take? What can you not take?
Mhm.
But you always need to be thinking about them. Another thing I'll point out that kind of helps us think more from a broader sense,
Yeah.
like thinking more like a CEO, is
Mhm.
everyone always complains about the news, right? They always say, oh man, the news is so negative, but they don't really understand why it's negative,
Mhm.
right? Going back to the question asking. So I'll give you the punchline, which you probably know.
Mhm.
It's normal that news doesn't need to be negative. It wasn't the case 50 years ago. 50 years ago, journalism used to be pretty truth-telling businesses, lots of data. Why? Because journalists were getting highly compensated for that, right?
Mhm.
The incentive structure was in place. But
Mhm.
today, there isn't three TV stations anymore. There's 3,000 million gajillion of them,
Yeah.
right? So I can go on Instagram, I can go on YouTube. So now news outlets have transitioned from being truth-telling businesses to becoming uh, entertainment businesses
Mhm.
in the sense that they need to propel negative news because they have so many employees now. Their cost structure doesn't make sense anymore. So the
Mhm.
only way to keep all of those employees is to regurgitate news that you want to hear or that is so negative that you want to keep listening to. So remember, everyone, if you want to start thinking like a CEO, you should never look at anything face value. You should always ask yourself, okay, what is the incentive structure behind that?
Mhm.
Right? Because the world runs on incentives. And once you understand the why that person is doing that, then you can start to say, okay, since the news is not a truth telling business and I want truth,
Mhm.
the best way of doing that is to seek out specific individuals who spit out news that is very objective. And I'll just follow those people, which is exactly what I do.
Mm. That's interesting. I kind of look at it the same way, but I describe it slightly differently. I
Sure.
tell myself that things are rarely what they appear to be. So there's always something else behind it. So I approach things with what I call a healthy skepticism, which I guess it kind of mirrors what you said, understanding the incentive structure. But then that leads me to another point, which is, and this is going to sound really kind of crude, but most people are lazy. Most people, because that's hard work. You know what? Wait, I need to challenge what I'm being told. I need to do my own research. I need to, develop or, the capacity to think outside the box. And, why? That's so hard. I'd rather be passive in the information sharing process rather than be actively engaged, challenging, fact checking, and challenging my own assumptions, my own preconceived notions, and my biases. That's really hard work. It requires a huge amount of self awareness and perhaps intellectual capacity, which people aren't prepared to deploy. So I don't think people are stupid. I just think they're lazy. They'd rather not. I'll just play on Instagram and just watch, scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and that makes sense. But anyway, it is what it
No,
is.
no, we're absolutely on the same page here, and
Yeah.
that's why I don't have that much sympathy for a lot of people out there. But at the same time,
Mhm.
I also know that there's a group of people who are very hardworking that just don't know where the information is. So I think those that's the segment I'm really interested in. You know, the 16-year-old girl in high school who's like, I'm gonna raise $100,000 for charity, but I don't want to speak to my classroom and give a presentation. This scares me like crazy. Right. So I want to exist for that individual. I want to create a world where there's no excuse for that specific vertical that you're trying to learn. So I think at the end of the day, and this is my philosophy in life, which is about solving problems and living an optimistic life, is if we all focused on solving one problem, we would be 7 billion times more successful. You know, because for me, I'm not here to tell you I'm going to solve climate change and all this stuff and do all these great things. No. What I'm telling you is I'm taking ownership over one of those problems, which ends up being my area of expertise, public speaking, and doing what Dale Carnegie couldn't do in his day and age because YouTube didn't exist. Right? So after I die, people can learn from me forever through video. But that's the thing, right? From that perspective, if I don't solve public speaking, I will take personal responsibility for that. Like, that's my fault if I don't get it done. But in the same way, I just wished if everyone just did that, it would make the life a lot more easier to live because you'd have a lot more meaning. You'd be like, well, I'm focused on climate change. I'm focused on women's rights or whatever it is that gets you excited to wake up every day. And then you just focus on that. But the interesting thing about focusing on that is the noise of every other problem goes away. Right? So you kind of just say, oh, well, this is happening. Don't let your emotions get in. Just focus on this one problem. Get it done. Focus on this. And that's how you knock out problems and do big things in life. At least how I found it anyways.
And I'm like 100% on that message as well. You know, it reminds me of another saying that I heard growing up, you know, like, if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So people who are just
100%.
complaining, or worse yet, they're waiting for the government or for some savior to come and to sweep them off their feet and to give them whatever it is they want. That just confuses me so much. I have like zero time and zero tolerance for people who want to complain or to blame this government or blame that politician or the other. It's like, you know, what are you doing? How are you taking responsibility for your situation? You're in charge of your own destiny. So I am with you 100%. Brenden, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I've walked away definitely a lot wiser. Thank you.
Of course, and as a bonus, I'll share you my favorite piece of advice that I usually give at the end for the people who have made it to 30 minutes into this conversation or are still listening to us. And here's my final gift. My favorite quote of all time is the following: be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you made it this far in the conversation, you probably do want to do something with it. You probably aren't lazy. You're probably very hardworking. So the only advice that matters is understanding where my success and potentially Derren's success comes from. It comes from an art of understanding how to be insane. Let me explain. Don't you find it bizarre that a 22-year-old kid started a YouTube channel, not on pranking, not on vlogging, not on comedy sticks, but on executive communication and public speaking? And then the year after, he started coaching many CEOs of different organizations, but also still lives in his mother's basement, doesn't own a car, doesn't plan on moving out of his mother's house until he's 30, and can karaoke in 8 different languages and dances alone in his basement or with his sister for an hour a day. How do any of those decisions make any sense at all? Oh, Brady, you're such a grown man. You had to go, live on your own and do all these things. But once all of your decisions make sense to the only person that matters, which is you, you're probably making the right decisions.
All right. Well, wow, what a powerful message. Brenden, thank you very much. It's good to connect with you.
Likewise, Derren. Such a pleasure.
Please subscribe, like, share, and comment below. Our books and upcoming event are available at htj.tax. Email us at help@htj.tax to engage us, to advise on international tax or business matters.